What is Prince Loki's devil fruit? What legendary produce could have caused Loki to murder his father, King Kingman, and give Loki the impression that he has now ascended to sun godliness? Well, there's quite a few options. My personal favorite being the weirdest and the most One Pieceiest of all. But let's deal with some business first. There were a shocking amount of people in my comments who suggested that Loki doesn't even have a devil fruit, and that perhaps he just killed his father to obtain the fruit but had the self-control to not gorge himself on it immediately for whatever reason. And the whatever reason for this line of thinking is because the scans and the official translation, as always, imply very different things. In the scans, it said that Loki's desire to eat the fruit was so great that he killed his own father, leaving whether or not he actually ate the devil fruit quite vague. But in the official translation, it is straight up confirmed that he's already eaten the legendary devil fruit, which I point out because I'm seeing a lot of very cool and very creative theories that Loki killed his father, and then Luffy's devil fruit reincarnated, which was then found by the world government, which was then found by the Shanks and eaten by Luffy, and that's what this whole arc is going to be about. A very personal affair between Loki and Luffy, which I think it will be regardless. We have a very sun god versus sun god matchup happening, as Luffy does have the actual Nika fruit. But long story less long, in the official translation, it is confirmed that Loki has already eaten the legendary fruit in question. And this is why we always read both scans and official, because from time to time they both get things wrong. You gotta cross-check. But let's figure out what this fruit is, and what we have is a 3-point checklist for fruit efficacy. Because we know nothing about the legendary devil fruit itself currently, but what we do know is where Loki is positioned, what he calls himself, and what he plans on doing. So point number the first, it must be a devil fruit worthy of being unironically called legendary. The sort of legendary that we'd use to refer to Roxy Zebek, and less the sort of legendary that we'd use to refer to Condoriano, legendary though he may be. Secondly, we can, or at the very least I will, infer that this devil fruit has some sort of relationship to fire. And the reason why I'm focusing on this is because of Harridan's participation in the Corridor Coliseum. His aim was to win poor dead Ace's Mera no Mi, which I believe could be because he saw that as the next best option to Elbaf's legendary fruit that was already consumed by Loki. There has to be a reason why Harridan would seek out that fruit. I mean, yeah, it's a Logia, it's fire, it's quite powersome, but Harridan isn't a man that's just looking for any old power. He's a proud giant warrior of Elbaf determined to become the next king, and I believe that he would be going to extremes to ensure that he's worthy of inheriting that mantle with the most appropriate fruit power possible. And our third criteria is that this devil fruit in some way needs to relate to the sun itself or the sun god Nika. Loki claims to be the sun god, and this isn't a road situation where he's cosplaying in Fantasyland. Loki seriously believes himself to be the sun god, and I don't think that he would be doing that completely fruit nude. What I imagine is more of a Blackbeard-like situation where Loki was seeking this devil fruit to become complete and fulfill his assorted destinies. So we got 3 things. It needs to be legendary, it probably has a connection to fire, and almost certainly has a connection to the sun or the sun god. So with all of those things, let's begin. The most obvious area to start searching for something like this is in the realm of mythical zoans, purely because Norse mythology has no shortage of legendary creatures, many of which seem to play a part in the destruction of the world as we know it or as we knew it. Alright, genuine question here. According to Norse mythology, has Ragnarok already happened? Is the world we're living in right now post-Ragnarok, or are we still waiting for it? In any case, while we wait, let's start with the most common idea that's been suggested, which is that the legendary devil fruit is the Inu no Mi model Fenrir, a big scary wolf being that was chained up and said to break free during Ragnarok, and in some tellings devours the sun. So there's a bit of a nice connection to the sun there. Not as nice as I would like, but I gotta say, a colossal wolf, and it'd be pretty damn cool. However, if I had to bet that sweet real-world cash money, I wouldn't be putting it on Fenrir. If only because the connection that the wider fanbase draws first is usually the one that's guaranteed to be incorrect. And the amount that I'm seeing Fenrir's name pop up makes me very wary of this as a solution. It's not hugely out of the question. Again, there's a sun connection, and some tales have Fenrir with like burning eye sockets and noses and faces and such. So there's some fire. But I guess the big thing for me is that I would personally have trouble assigning myself the title of sun god if I were in fact a mega wolf potentially fated to devour said sun. To me, they just don't connect. I do think that Fenrir, or a reference to Fenrir, is almost guaranteed to pop up at some point during Elbaf, but I'm just not feeling it as Loki's ability ability. Right now, there are stronger choices, such as the Hito Hito no Mi model Surta, someone who definitely ticks off the fire box as he is the figure who ultimately destroys all of the things. But whether this is the legendary Devil Fruit or not, the giant sword on Elbaf is almost certainly a reference to Surta's sword used for said Ragnarific destruction. This fire sword is sometimes even said to shine brighter than the sun itself. So there is a potential sun connection here, because mate, if you can outsun the sun, then you may as well become the sun. But something else I've also seen brought up a bit is the possibility of the Hebi no Mi model Jormungandr, which is a name I'm horrible at pronouncing, but it's the world serpent that we've already had a reference to in Rhodes' room. Based on that alone, I think I would rule it out, because in Rhodes' diorama, the sun god clearly outranks the cute little snake. But I also think that serpent abilities may end up making Loki look and feel a bit too similar to Kaido's dragon powers, especially because Loki's base form is already very Kaido-esque. So I don't think that Oda would take us down that road again. And also Orochi, he was a big old snake fruit as well. So I think, or at least I hope, that we're done in that sort of snakesome realm. I'd love something a bit more visually distinct. And where that takes us could be a mythical Zoan of Balder, the god of light, radiance, joy, and purity. Something that sounds eerily familiar to the ideas of Nika and Joy Boy. And in good old Norse mythology, Balder's death was caused by Loki. And that's the reason why Loki was chained up until the commencement of Ragnarok. So if Loki's father Harald had the Balder fruit, essentially being the Balder himself, and Loki kills him for those wonderful sun powers, and he gets chained up as punishment, then that is a very direct lifting of this tale into one piece. Of all of the mythical possibilities, Balder would be my preferred option because it's the most sleek idea, whereas many of the others rely on what I like to call the big monster effect, and that's something that I would love to avoid on Elbaf if possible, which is a hope that may be slightly in vain, because if there's any location for a big ol' monster, it's the big ol' island. But this is something that I think that late stage One Piece is leaning on a bit too much. Not just big creatures, but mythical Zoan effects in general. Because we're really starting to enter a territory in One Piece where every relevant enemy needs to be some sort of mythical creature just to pose a threat. And in fact, even Luffy needed to become a mythical Zoan himself to reach his peak. And I'm really hoping that One Piece still has something to offer where the answer to the big fictional fruit questions aren't always something mythical Zoan. Because I feel like we've really been playing out the big monster effect for the last 6 to 7 years. When it comes to Zoans, I still have a bit of Wano exhaustion from over-Zoaning during that arc, and we spent such a long time facing off against Kaido's mythical Zoan. Then on Egghead Island, I know the 5 Elders are very unlikely to be mythical Zoan users themselves, and their power is more probably the result of Imu's abilities, but it doesn't matter because what it has is ultimately the same effect, where you get 5 enemies who can transform into giant mythical creatures. I've talked about this to death in other videos, but Oda does this to keep Luffy looking small, to keep him in the position of underdog, no matter how much power he accumulates. So my big hope for Loki is that because he's already massive, he's not going to need to be equipped with a devil fruit that makes him even larger. We've already got the size differential that we need with him, and hopefully this is an opportunity we can take to explore the other 2 brands of devil fruit that seem to have lost quite a bit of relevance post-time skip. But then again, here's another issue with mythical Zoans. It's almost narrative malpractice not to use them, because by nature they're usually capable of producing paramecia and even Logia type powers as well. So using mythical Zoans allows Oda to get the most use out of his villains, because legendary creatures can do anything you want them to, whilst Logia and paramecia fruits can generally only do the one thing it is that they do, and that would limit creativity a bit, or enhances it. I personally believe that restrictions breed creativity. But just on the note of legendary, it's interesting that they've used the word legendary as opposed to the word mythical, which gives me some hope that this isn't a Zoan, only a little bit though, because that could just be Elbaf terminology. Isolated islands tend to have their own ways of referring to standardized powers, like how all devil fruits on Wano were considered to be jutsu, and how Haki is referred to as Ryuo. So having locked themselves away for so long, legendary may just be their substitution for mythical, or who knows, we might even be looking at a whole new subclass of devil fruit entirely. At the moment though, I'm hoping for a Logia, because the one thing we are really missing post-time skip is that solid Logia antagonist. It's not that they don't exist. We've had Caesar Clown on Punk Hazard, and Kizaru was a secondary antagonist of Egghead Island. There was also that jolt of fun provided by Green Bull on Wano, who genuinely has such a cool Logia that I want to see more of. But by and large, post-time skip Logia fruits very much fall into the mid-bin, with a lot of representation seen in figures like Caribou and Monet, very much undervaluing Logias compared to their pre-time skip notoriety. society. The idea of Haki did irreparable damage to the perception of Logias, because these days it's almost like a Logia is less desirable than a Paramecia, because all Logia fruits just seem to get hard cancelled by Haki, whereas Paramecias, I don't know, at least they can give you something wacky to do. But in every post-time skip case, Logia fruits have really lacked the oomph they had pre-time skip, and I really miss that feeling of dread that used to manifest when we came across figures like Crocodile, NL, or even originally Kizaru. So here's my proposal, right? What we're going to make Logias great again, and we're going to make Loki pay for it. In this case, the main difficulty with a Logia fruit is we already have a fire fruit and we already have a light fruit. So there's not a whole lot of other avenues for another element to come in and pretend to be the sun, except we were recently introduced to a new element, a very important element called the Mother Flame, an undying substance said to be a source of unlimited energy that in the form of a Logia fruit would be terrifying but also amazingly cool. Think about it, to see a literal fire giant. And this is something that ticks every box. Legendary? Yeah, because this is a legendary substance. Fire? Obviously. And then as for the sun, well, I too would consider myself a sun god if I had this sort of power. And in that way, the battle between Luffy and Loki would become one more about the raw power of the sun versus the symbolic meaning of the sun, manifestations of hope, light, release from darkness, etc., all of the lovely things. There are a couple of issues with Loki being a Logia though. One is that surely he'd be able to escape his chains if he were, unless those chains were made out of 99% of the world's supply of sea stone, because holy crap, this is a lot of stone. You know what, they probably are regardless, so that's not a real issue. The only other thing I could see is that it may risk thematically infringing upon the events of the final fight with Blackbeard, because to his credit, he is a Logia user with a pretty decent thread attached to him, although he's being built up more as a combination of all three classes, Paramecia and Logia that he already has, and potentially a third devil fruit which would almost certainly be a Zoan. But it would still be nice to see Luffy properly fight and defeat a pure Logia. Kizaru gave us a bit of a taste of what that would be like, but mate, I want that full meal. And then we come to Paramecia, which I've saved till now because this is by far my favorite idea. I'm gonna make this very clear. This is not the idea that I think is the most likely. This is just what I see as the most fun. And I've got to give credit to all of you because a ton of you pointed this out to me in the comment section, and I think, judging from what you've said, this is an idea that comes from Tekking. But the proposal here is that the devil fruit that Loki ate is the true Gomu Gomu no Mi, which was mistaken for the Nika fruit that Luffy ate. And what's happened here is a bit of the old swap, and Luffy and Loki have accidentally eaten each other's devil fruits. The giants worship the sun god Nika. So when Loki says that he's the sun god, surely he's also referring to Nika. And this may have been possible because throughout their history, they've had access to the actual Nika fruit. But then one day, a bit of a whoops happens. Their devil fruit gets swapped with an identical one that does nothing except turn its user into rubber. Meanwhile, the Nika fruit is also believed to be the Gomu fruit, and that makes its way into the world with very few, if any people, being truly aware of what's going on. And this has caused a big problem in giant society ever since, because now their rulers are no longer capable of accessing those sweet, sweet sun god powers. All they can do is stretch, which was the very basic function of the sun god fruit. And so it may look like none of the Elbaf rulers for X amount of years have been worthy of truly inheriting the sun god mantle because they can't do the sun god things. The quote, legendary devil fruit is still passed down throughout the generations, hoping that one day a worthy giant will arise to consume fruit and become sun, but so far no one has been capable of using it. However, our Loki, he's a very ambitious boy, and he believes that he will be the one to unlock the sun god powers after a millennia, perhaps even longer, of them being lost to the giants. But then he sees Luffy become Nika, and a battle of gods commences. I want to make this clear, this is a stupid idea, but One Piece is a stupid series. And I know it may verge a bit too much on what was done with Luffy versus Katakuri, but it would be classic One Piece. And whatever the case, what we're looking at here is a sun god versus sun god showdown. I don't know exactly what form that's going to take. As we've explored in this video, there are a lot of options, all of them exciting, and a ton of options we don't know that exist in the mind brain of Eiichiro Oda that may even be much more exciting. So I want you to let me know in the comments what you would like Loki's devil fruit to be.